As we sit here tonight, they got their engines fixed. The Sea Shepherd is on its way from Holland, on its way to Key West, on after that going up the Aleutian Islands to confront the Asian driftnet fleets. If you're not familiar with the driftnet situation, a number of countries float 30-mile-long nets, about a mile wide, out on the high seas. Kills everything in its path, and the idea is to catch the North American salmon run before it hits the shore. It's going to be really interesting action because the radical environmentalists are teaming up with the fishing industry. After teaming up with the fishing industry, they're going to go down to Costa Rica and harass the fishing industry. Try to cut up a few nets that are catching the dolphins with the tuna. But in the past year, I've had a chance to hang out with a few of the people who sail on the Sea Shepherd, and it's been a real honor, and I'd like to number those people here tonight. They got guts. This is their song.
Friends.
protect life's beauty, we do what we must do on the proud sea shepherd, we defend the ocean blue. Still the wailing continues, the harbors turn to brown, they slaughter the dolphins, destruction all around. So to all destroyers, this message we do send, when we meet on the high seas, we'll take you on again. So we sail the oceans, the earth from end to end, for the whales and dolphins and all our water friends, to protect life's beauty, we do what we must do on the proud sea shepherd, we defend the ocean blue. On the proud sea shepherd, we defend the ocean blue.
Two scenarios. You have watched the logging site through lenses while hiding in man-made brush piles and trash. You have crept as close to them as you dare, lying frozen for hours as they cut and slash. You have counted their workers and guards. You have watched for dogs and guns. Or you have spied on them with a scope from a ridge above a harbor during the slaughter. You have recorded their comings and goings, for you are looking for that window. Someplace, somehow, there must be a way. You watch them both like a cat and a snake, at once so alert with nerves ablaze, ready to pounce on them in an instant, and again so slow and patient, like the rocks that you are hiding in. Maybe you will feed next year instead. You are looking for perfect timing and information. For if you knew everything, you would succeed every time. To know when the site will be empty, when the watchman and the dog will be gone, when their warning systems will be off. Then you would know when all of your systems are on. But you will never know for sure until you do it. And you'll never get a second chance. You've done all your homework and surveillance, and now all that's left is you and your dance. Yet you still check your equipment 3 more times: wrenches, hammer and bolt cutters, pry bar, cutting torch, and persuaders. You review your list till you know them by heart. As the minutes count down slower and slower, you know now that the waiting is the hardest part. Your fear has a life all of its own. It comes over you and takes its toll. Fears of randomness and of all the unknowns. Fears of everything that you cannot control. Did you say goodbye to Mom? Or your child? This isn't kid stuff, you know. You could get killed. There will be some chaos in any action. It's a problem of synchronization. Now even the blacks and the whites appear hazy. Now you begin to believe that you are truly, truly crazy. And finally, at last, It is time to begin. Everything else in the world is illusion now. As you go through the fence, past the watchman, past the check booth, it is now your moment of personal truth. For now, all that is left is cold, steely will. For now, it is time to go in for the kill. All that is left is cold, steely will. It is time to go in for the kill. That's Going In for the Kill, a poem by Dwight Worker, who is the poet who performed Sink It at the end of the first part of our Earth First Navy special here. I'm getting real about reality. Hi, I'm Andy Caffrey, and I'm in recovery from MSNBC. So welcome to the show here. I put together a lot of archives of Earth First activities, Earth First music, warrior poetry. Sometimes I perform a little bit of it. And you'll hear a little commentary from me and interviews from friends and experts that I know in the coming weeks and months, so that we can get real about what we're dealing with as human beings here on this planet, as a civilization. Get straight about the order of magnitude and the urgency of the various crises, and organize effectively, whether it's within the political context or outside of it, to get the job done in time, because it can become too late. So this segment is part 2 of the Paul Watson presentation. You're going to hear in a little bit the question and answer session from Paul's talk. And we're also going to feature in this episode 4 musical performances at Earth First Rendezvous, all of which coincidentally happen to feature my friend, the great songwriter and performer Dana Lyons from Bellingham, Washington. And that was Dana who opened the show. I think he actually was a member of the Earth First Navy and did a little bit of time on one of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society campaign ships. And after doing that, he was very inspired and wrote that song, which was a performance from the 1989 Earth First Round River Rendezvous in the Jemez Range in New Mexico. I'll tell you more about the other songs, which you'll hear after the question and answer session. But I want to remind you about some of the points that Captain Watson made in his presentation, explain a few of them, since some of them are using language that we use in the Earth First activist culture, like a biocentric enema. Well, I'm not going to explain to you what an enema is, but biocentrism is a fundamental principle of deep ecology. It's a term used to describe people in contrast to the norm for our civilization, which is anthropocentric people. There are older traditions of humans who were naturally biocentric, or as it later came to be called, ecocentric. And those are the traditional peoples who live, stereotypically live with the land, whether they're herders or hunter-gatherers, rainforest or savanna dwellers. And we seem to have lost that and become more and more human-centered. In fact, our basic metaphysical maps, our spiritual, religious paradigm has human beings at the top of a pyramid, or right underneath God, but above all of the other creatures of this planet. And in fact, we think we live on a rock that has things growing on it and living on it, rather than thinking of ourselves as within one system, one organism, which another part of deep ecology got into talking about the Gaia hypothesis, which we'll get into some other time. But it is the idea that the Earth is not a collection of organisms, but it is one organism that has all of these suborganisms. It operates as an organism. It is self-regulating of the conditions it needs to stay alive. And in fact, that's very much like what a human being is. I've just been reading about how the microbiology, we could be seen not just as a body that is created by DNA, but as hosts for getting microbes passed down generation after generation. So these perceptions are really important because you have to have an incredible arrogance, be extremely anthropocentric to do the destruction of nature like we do it. And so what Paul Watson is talking about is that if you develop a biocentric orientation, which is that the earth is the whole, and we are immersed in nature, and we are immersed in these ecosystems, there's no point where I end and the rest of the ecosystem starts. We are all a continuous ecosystem with this kind of material illusion of being a separate, discrete organism or human being or biological carrier of a spirit entity. Choose your model. So Paul is saying we need a biocentric enema. People just really need to get it because we are all so disconnected that we're not remotely dealing with any of our problems. And especially since most of our problems are simply symptoms of our way of life. So if we change our way of life, we solve our problems, the ones that we can still solve. So he talked about guerrilla warfare versus anthropocentrism. So he brings up the paradigm of warfare, and he also later on talks about how there is a war against the planet. Well, if that is an accurate perception, then that would justify there being warriors on behalf of the planet. And that is how people in Earth First tend to see themselves, but nonviolent warriors. And in fact, despite some of Paul's rhetoric, his way of doing activism has always been nonviolent direct action. The Sea Shepherd Society hasn't killed anybody or hurt anybody, and as far as the publicly known activism of Paul Watson, he hasn't done it in anything that anybody knows about. So that's another thing too, is how did he make you feel? Did he make you feel awkward? Defensive? Was he challenging you and the way you look at things? Or did he inspire you? Did you go, right on, man, say it like it is? You know, one of the memes that went around Earth First is fuck the human race. There was definitely a lot of anthropocentrism. It was meant not, well, some people jokingly talked about human extinction. We had the voluntary human extinction movement, I think, something like that. Which was, you could go ahead and commit suicide and that'd be better for the rest of the biosphere, but it was also about not reproducing so that when you go, you're gone and you don't leave more consumers after you in your wake to continue the plundering of the planet. That would also justify a response to being polluted and killed by hooker chemical, the way you would defend yourself in any situation of self-defense. So it's used in the metaphors of war and self-defense, but it's not really manifested in violent actions. It's more to get people out of the notion that just being a liberal and having sentiments that are the correct ones, but not really having a warrior's attitude, a warrior's persistence, is inadequate. Edward Abbey, an inspiration of Earth First, the fiction and nonfiction writer, said that sentiment without action is the ruin of the soul. And I agree with that. I do. I've been doing this my whole life. I'm 61. and I've just seen everyone get sucked away in their little anthropocentric vision. So that is, I think, the basic challenge of Paul Watson. He talked about McLuhan too, and I think the interaction between him and Judy Berry speaks for itself. Boy, you could spend a whole evening talking about your reactions to the various partisans in that exchange. So, yeah, and so this is also why he justifies sinking whaling ships, and that's why I played Dwight Worker's performance of Sink It at the 1993 Mount Graham, Arizona Round River Rendezvous, which is actually, he has sunk whaling ships and drift netting ships, and he wears this little lever that was a souvenir from one of his actions, and then his fellow performer Julie Alexander held that thing up when she was doing her reading at the very, very end of that. And he wrote this little pamphlet, 16-page pamphlet called Sink It, and he took that pamphlet and turned it into that poem. So that's really fabulous. I recite that sometimes at Earth First events, since Dwight doesn't circulate among the movement much anymore. And and you might have recognized Julie's voice. She was my sound person a couple of days later when we had our action, our Mount Graham action. She carried my microphone around to get it up right into where the Earth Firsters and the law enforcement authorities were, so that we get good sound, even though I was perhaps 20, 25 feet away, so I could get close-up shots with a zoom and also wide group shots, which I couldn't do if I got close enough to have to use the camera's microphone to get good sound. So that was a little trick I had. I had a 25-foot cable that ran out of the microphone output jack of my Sony camcorder, and Julie was excellent at getting it right where it needed to be, and some of the musical performances in earlier episodes of this show were recorded by her at the top of the road up to the Scope project at Mount Graham. Okay, well, now we're going to go into the questions and answers, and then we'll get back to some music to wrap up. So if you haven't seen the first part of this segment, which is actually part 2 of this episode, the actual talk by Captain Paul Watson is going to be kind of meaningless for the next 20 minutes or so. But skip ahead to the last 3 songs. They're really, really great. Turn them up. They're Earth First rockers. They're playing acoustic, although the last track does have electric guitar and electric bass. Also at that 1993 Mount Graham Rendezvous. So you're going to see Bill Oliver and Glenn Waldeck and Dana Lyons singing together, and then you're going to see Dana and Lone Wolf Circles. And one other thing I'll mention is that there's a call out at the very, very end by Wolf, at the very, very end of this show, to Rod Coronado.
I'd like to dedicate that song to a good friend of mine, a wild wolf that's still not stuck at a zoo. A wild wolf celebrating his birthday. Let's hear it for Rod Coronado on the loose! Rod Coronado on the loose! Woo! Run free, run wild, run him to the ground.
And Rod Coronado is the person who actually, one of the 2 people who actually sank the Icelandic whaling fleet. It wasn't Paul who sank it. It was Rod and, was it David Howlett? Somebody can correct that. So that's why it all ties together. These songs and poems are all about the ocean eco-defense movement. And there were also smaller offshoot groups from the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. So it wasn't the only group that was engaged in both going out there and getting in the way of, for example, whale hunters or baby harp seal clubbers, or going out in the middle of the night during the off-season, in the middle of the winter, and sinking unattended whaling ships or drift net ships. So go back and watch Paul's talk and then come back and hear the question and answers. I think that too will provoke a lot of discussion in your activist groups about what's appropriate, but the whole point of this is not to tell you what's right or wrong. It's to provoke some contrast in our views so that we can think about new ways of doing things. You may not agree with something that Paul says, but maybe hearing it will trigger some idea, even a counter idea, that makes things better or more effective in whatever you're doing. So that's how I think about it. There's no party line here. We're just trying to critically think about things, understand the reality we're confronting, and do the best, most effective and righteous organizing we can. Hopefully, soon enough.
Yeah, I have a question for Captain Paul Watson. For those who are activists and can't go blow up bulldozers and sink ships and really want to contribute to the movement to save the planet, what recommendations, what recourse do you have?
It's more important, really, to look at your attitudes, not what. If everybody takes a different philosophical approach to things, that is, do what you do and do it best, but don't do it for yourself anymore, do it for the planet. So if you're a teacher, you teach. If you're a writer, you write. If you're a journalist, you report. But you do it no longer for yourself, but for the planet. I don't expect everybody, to qualify to be an environmentalist because they go out and spike a tree or something,
Well, what I'm getting at is homework for people, things to take home from these workshops, things to do, letter writings, having parties where you do write letters together in your community, taking action in another way.
Get out in the woods on April 21st.
All right. Quit your job.
Quit your job. Yeah. Quit your job.
Yeah, I have a question for Captain Watson, but also for anybody else. And this is sort of a devil's advocate kind of question. It's not necessarily an attack, but it's a means and ends question, which I guess I think that was an inevitable question. But you can justify violent means towards an end, which I think we all agree we want to see as a non-oppressive, non-exploitative, non-sexist, all species encompassed in a peaceful, loving manner where there is no deception, no violent thoughts, no unnecessary killing. And I'm just curious as to when using violent means, when do we know when we've gotten to our ends, and we can where do we draw the line and say, now we've gotten to our ends, and the planet is living like a global ecosystem should, and now we can stop being violent.
Well, it all depends what violence is. I mean, I don't think that we do anything violent. If you call destroying a whaling ship which kills whales violent, I disagree with that. Removing something that kills something is an act of non-violence. Destroying a bulldozer which kills trees is an act of non-violence.
Yeah, but the act of, like when you're talking about going in and shooting the president of the company, that is an act of violence.
What about abortion clinics?
All right.
Yeah, well,
That's the other side. Abortion clinics. What about that?
And the panelists to respond, and I would appreciate that everyone respect that. Thank you.
but you have to respond the way you feel. If you feel justified in doing something, if it's considered violent, because you have real reasons for doing it, then I think that is justified in itself. If I was dying of leukemia because of something that the president of Hooker Chemical Company did, I'm going to get it. And but I wouldn't say just go out and get the guy otherwise. It's a very complicated.
I like to answer the question. I like to answer the question.
The best way to answer it is you do something which is considered violent when it's effective.
Okay, Darryl would like to respond.
Yeah, every time we get into our automobiles, we can commit a horrendous act of violence to the atmosphere. So every one of us here, at the very least, is committing violence every day to the earth. So all of us need to recognize that violence within ourselves. The only people who won't recognize that as violent are people who are anthropocentric, who only see the world in human terms, not in terms of all species. We have there's a definition of violence which can be under question, but let's say that we accept a certain amount of violence. A tidal wave coming in, crashing against the coast is violent. A volcano erupting is violent. A lion tearing apart its prey is violent. I don't think that violence in itself is a bad thing. I think we need to make moral judgments. There's a lot of people here who have supported the El Salvador, the FLMN, is that right? FMLN? Okay. Who've supported them in their struggle because they know that the odds are completely against them, and they've used violence against the government, even though we know that violence is wrong. These people have their backs against the wall. So I think that it's a moral decision for people to make.
A revolution is not a dinner party.
Corner.
One of the reasons is we get involved in civil disobedience, and it's one of the most powerful ways to give issues away, not just to media, not just to the policymakers, but to all the people in the country. And that's why I think civil disobedience actions begin. It's a way to popularize issues. You can't get anybody to form opinions about something until they know that the issues exist. And one of the best ways to do that was initially came out about with civil disobedience. There's another way to give issues away that's very powerful. And I'm very excited when I hear you talking about taking the doors off of assembly things or offices. This is a tremendous tool, but there's a way to give that away that's being overlooked that I think we should all think about as a way to popularize a lot of these issues. These little high-tech pieces of equipment are incredible. And I would hope that the next time Earth goes and takes somebody's doors off a congressman's office or hijacks a log truck or does something of that you appoint somebody to take one of these with you. And
the FBI already does that for you.
They don't go to the media with these images. Now there are people in San Francisco when you show up with images of log tracks being hijacked, myself, I have the context of the media that I will make sure these pictures get on the networks. And as a sign of earnest, I have a little 8mm camera I'm going to give the first third person that comes to San Francisco to claim one.
We'll take it.
The camera I'm going to give you spent 6 months undercover on a tuna boat. It spent 3 months out in the North Pacific on drift net vessels. It's been to Antarctica and just came back from the Andes taking pictures of the old growth forest.
This is the guy that you do right up here.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it's yours, okay?
We'd like it.
Yeah, I have a question, and I'm trying to work this out in my mind. It's very difficult for me. I'm a fairly radical environmentalist, and I understand how civil disobedience can be justified in saving the environment. I think I believe in that. But what about when the other side uses it, the religious fanatics that are blowing up abortion clinics? I can't believe it. I don't believe that they should be allowed to use that, blowing up abortion clinics, but we are allowed to use civil disobedience, to further our goals. Can somebody up front answer that fondly for me? It's a very difficult question. I have not been able to work that out in my mind.
I think it is a difficult question, and my bottom line on that is that it's all right for us to do it. It's not all right for them. I think we sort of delude ourselves into thinking that we've got to have some sort of value-free way of or value-free principles or whatever. And the thing is, there is no such thing. The two situations are different, and there's nothing wrong with saying that they are different, and there's nothing hypocritical about saying that they are different situations. That it is morally justifiable to engage in acts of civil disobedience along the lines of what we were hearing a little while ago in terms of the stuff that Earth First is doing and the stuff the ALF is doing, but that it is not okay for people whose basic vision of the world is They don't want people to have sex education. They don't want people to have abortions. They're not into taxation. They don't want to support all the unwanted children that are going to be born. All they want to do is shove their truth down the throat of everybody else. And in my view, I think it's perfectly okay to say that's wrong and we're not going to permit it. One thing I think we have to be careful about is, there is this racketeering statute, which originally came into being so that could be used against white-collar criminals. What has happened is that some progressive groups have very cleverly used that against people who are blocking entrances to abortion clinics, and I can tell you that that sort of set off some sparks in the minds, to the extent that they have them, of the other side, because the RICO stuff is going to be used against us, so just sort of keep that in mind. But I mean, I don't see why we are afraid to say bombing abortion clinics is wrong and stopping logging operations is right. I mean, what's wrong with that?
I want to say something about this too. I don't perceive bombing an abortion clinic or bombing anywhere where there are people as being an act of nonviolent civil disobedience. I think that I think that people often call things like that civil disobedience. That's not civil disobedience. That's terrorism, and there's a difference. I think there is. I think that an act of nonviolent civil disobedience. I do not commit violence toward any other living being. I do not direct violence toward any other living being. I put myself between what they're trying to do and what they're trying to do it to. That is nonviolent civil disobedience. I usually separate even monkey wrenching from that. I see monkey wrenching as being nonviolent, and I see monkey wrenching as being a form of civil disobedience, but it's different.
But remember that you have to be careful about terrorism, because we are all terrorists to them. And I think the issue is perhaps maybe if there's a line that has to be drawn, and I don't know where to draw it, but it seems to me that whenever life is at stake, human or non-human life, the destruction of property, it seems to me, can always be justified. But I think it becomes. I agree with you when you're talking about violence against human or non-human animals. Then you are talking about different moral considerations. But the destruction of property is something that people in progressive movements have been doing for a long time. And so what? Property is just one of their notions anyway.
Well, no, my assumption is that there are people like in this clinic that they're bombing. If that's the case, I support monkey wrenching. I see that as being nonviolent. I don't see violence directed at living beings as at living beings. That is violence.
I agree.
Oh boy. My question about the effectiveness and the appropriateness, not appropriateness, but the effectiveness sometimes of civil disobedience. The panel seems to feel pretty strongly, as everybody does in the room, that civil disobedience is always right. And my question is, how much thought have you given that? My question comes from my experience. I have a public interest environmental practice in the Bay Area. We represent a bunch of commercial fishermen, and we were trying to keep the Port of Oakland from dumping some nasty dredge spoils in the ocean where they fish. And my clients are very much like all of you, very, very good at handling the media, and we had, we really turned the Bay Area around on this, and we really had public support very much in our favor, and then at one point we lost a very important point in the legal process. I'll spare you the details, but the barging was beginning, and the dredge spoils were going, and with very little consultation to their attorneys, our clients jumped in their fishing boats, and we had a very major thing at sea with 40 fishing boats and the barge coming, and it got terrific press coverage. So in that respect, it was effective as a media action, and it was, civil disobedience to the hilt. But in terms of its effectiveness in our case, it was a disaster, because they had been so good at generating all of this public support, and we had all these people on the case, not so much on the case, but just that the public was rallying, and public officials were there, and we were winning. And that completely pulled back. And we eventually won, but we really had to scramble at that point to make ourselves and our point legitimate, because it just became a bunch of jerks, on the high seas, being dramatic for no reason, causing a big problem. And the public support that we so carefully nurtured and garnered over all these months went away. I'm not trying to say that I don't believe in civil disobedience. My question is, do you feel that there are times when it is and is not effective? And to me, that's the bottom line. What's effective at getting to where you want to be? And my experience with it at that time was very counterproductive. Not so much unsuccessful, but just totally counterproductive.
one of the major disadvantage with civil disobedience is that when people are arrested, all of a sudden it's going to tie up a lot of money and a lot of energy and a lot of lawyers. And that's where I think it can be counterproductive, because then everything has to grind to a halt as the bail funds go up and everything. So this is a problem with civil disobedience.
But that's not what I'm talking about.
No, but you're asking where it doesn't work. And it doesn't work when that happens.
Well, it didn't work here either, and nobody got arrested. It was just that it didn't, I mean, we needed the public on our side, and what happened was the public went, fuck you, you're a bunch of jerks.
They stopped the barge.
I think that has a lot to do with the public. I think that has a lot to do with public perception of civil disobedience in this country, which is a lot of people in this country seem to feel that people who do civil disobedience are no better than common criminals, and we have got to re-educate the people in this country about what civil disobedience is. There is a very big difference between breaking a law to achieve a higher good on a very moral and ethical basis, and risking, I've never been convicted of anything else but civil disobedience. Most people who do civil disobedience fall into the same category, and we have got to re-educate the public. Our country wouldn't be here without civil disobedience. Women would not have the vote without civil disobedience.
Yeah, keep in mind.
There would be no civil rights laws without civil disobedience.
You are saying that it's always the right way.
No, but keep in mind, the people in Boston probably complained they didn't have tea for a month also, because the public's always going to be against them.
If I were in that position, I would have done the same thing, and I bet it was successful from their point of view because it gave them a sense of personal empowerment. That's one of the really great aspects of civil disobedience.
Okay, I think that's legitimate. My question is, we were very hurt.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. You say that you won your case.
We, in spite of this.
No, you say you won your case. That's what's important. It didn't hurt you so badly that it won your case. Now maybe a year from now, those same Fisher people will be confronted with another obstacle to their livelihoods, and they will have this as experience to teach them how to do it again when they need to come up. We need to look at things in a very broad perspective. It didn't hurt you this case. It may be preparing them for a future case when they need to use it more. You've won, so I wouldn't worry about it since you won.
Okay, this will be the last question. I think we're about out of time.
Yeah, I just like to say something about the strategy of what's going on. Somebody said that you got to do it right. You be very careful about what's going on. I think we need to be a lot more careful about what we do, and I'd like to ask you people to think very carefully about this kind of thing. Like civil disobedience started, the reason it has a reputation is people taking the high ground, the moral high ground, being self-righteous almost about it. You can call Gandhi or Martin Luther King self-righteous, Okay, so the idea is that you're going for something for a higher good. Okay? Now we have a situation right now in the Pacific Northwest where if you do civil disobedience against a timber sale that Mark Hatfield took away from the courts and told the Forest Service to cut it, you are upholding the law of the United States when you do that, which is a lot different than if you do some other things that we get involved with, which is a lot muddier. So I think we have limited resources and limited time. All you people clapping, it's great, but you ain't going to be out there unless you really think what you're going to be doing is effective. And I think we need to think about what the heck is really going to be effective, and we need to do it. And so we got a situation where we can stand up and say, we are right, we are for the law, and we are for the earth, and this is very clear. It's very clear what we're standing for. It's not always clear, but when it is clear, then we got to do it. Because this is a war. We are in a serious trip, and we like to be happy, and we like to play songs and get all riled up and feel good, but this is serious business. And so we got to think, use this little focus.
There's a new philosophy in Earth First that we're being too careful. Secrecy is not what we want, because once you start to get secret, then you start to really conspire. We want what we've been doing throughout the movement, East Coast to West, is having open meetings, letting people openly know where we're going, showing that there are no actual organizers to what we're doing. Everybody is going there on their own and picking sites that we can blockade regardless of whether the FBI or the cops know we're there. Now, if I'm going to get busted, or Paul Watson's going to get busted, or Judy Barry's going to get busted, they're going to bust us whether we do it in secret or whether we do it in public. Those are the dues we have to pay when we take this kind of stand. But if we start to get secret, we're going to keep our numbers small. We need to open ourselves up to the public and we need to have a democracy within the environmental movement, not a closed-door policy. Thank you.
What do you do when I mean, don't your actions get frustrated by the fact that they find out what you're doing because you're being open about it?
No.
They will eventually, though.
No, because when we blockade a logging road, it's a big old road, and there's a lot of us, and they don't know who's going for it. You just choose an action in which secrecy is irrelevant to the action.
I'd like to say one last thing, which is that, we all knew that the old growth movement was going to get to a point someday where we were all going to have to get out there and do something about it. We are at that point. Dress rehearsal is over, people. This is it. This is the moment we've all been waiting for, and we have each and every one of us have to get ourselves out there and everybody else we know out there, or it won't work, and those forests are going to fall. And I don't want to live on a world where there isn't any old growth. Nothing that can happen to me is worse than what's happening to those forests right now. Think about it and get out there, please.
Get
together and do it.
Where and when?
We're having a secret meeting at the Earth First booth downstairs, 6 o'clock. We are invading the California redwoods. The wrath of the environmental movement shall fall down upon the bastard organization Maxam.
That's a little down there, Greg.